that there are more people coming because of the confusion in the room, but we'll just still get started. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the first seminar this term, but sixth overall this year in our Interrogating Development seminar series. My name is Dr. Ece Kocabıçak. I'm a lecturer in development economics and the Department of International Development here at King's. That is a mouthful. In this series, we basically examine some of the most pressing issues of development facing global society today, the authors of new books and new research, and we invite them to present their cutting-edge research on a variety of topics related to development. So today, I am very, very, very thrilled to welcome Dr. Ece Kocabıçak. I hope I got close enough. Sorry. Who will talk to us about her new book, The Political Economy of Patriarchy in the Global South. It is also available for sale right out there with the very nice Emma helping us with that. Just to introduce Ece is currently a senior lecturer in sociology at Open University and executive secretary of the Economy and Society Research Committee of the International Sociological Association. Her research examines the diverse variations of gender regimes and manifestations of racism in the Global South and how these regimes shape strategies of capital accumulation and state formation. In particular, she has pioneered research on how gender discrimination in land ownership affects labor migration from agriculture to non-agricultural sectors in developing countries. Ece's research has been recognized and awarded by several prestigious organizations, including the UK government's International Science Partnerships Fund, the European Institute at the LSE, and the ESRC's Global Challenge Fund, and the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. So welcome, Ece. Thank you for coming and sharing your research with us. I will also introduce our two discussants, so you don't have to hear me like talking later, and we can save time. So Ece will present her work for about 23 minutes, and then they'll be followed by comments by our two discussants who very kindly have read the book and are going to share. Also, are experts in the field, so it's great to have this conversation. So first up, we have Dr. Shiba Tajani, who's a senior lecturer in international development here in the department. Her work is centered on the distributional consequences of international trade and structural transformation in developing countries. She has also studied labor market inequalities in the context of structural change and export-oriented industrialization in countries of the Global South. In related and emerging research programs, she's exploring the consolidation of Hindu-majoritarianism in India and its relationship to development and exclusion. And we also, the second discussant is Dr. Lorena Lombardozzi, who is a senior lecturer in Political Economy of Development at SOAS University in London. Her research interests include theoretical debates in political economy, inequality, growth and distribution, as well as applied areas of international development, gender and political economics, labor and work, welfare state and social policy, agro-industrial policy, and innovation, food systems, global value chains, and research methods in social science. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Ece, without further delay, and let's get started.
Fine, Minecraft, not to talk so much. Can you hear my voice? Is it clear from the back? Great. Thank you all for coming here today. I would like to also thank the Department of International Development at King's College for inviting me. In particular, I like to thank Denika for this great organization and wonderful discussers, Lorena Lombardozzi and Shiba Tajani. Thank you so much. I'm so lucky to have you. And before we begin, Burley Fisher Books is here to organize book sales outside, and they are one of the few independent bookshops to focus on supporting small press publications and the local writing community in Hackney. If you plan to buy my book, it would be great to support Burley Fisher Books. This is a bit of that.
Is it? Yes.
So why this book? Are we, as Claudia Goldin suggests, witnessing the great gender convergence with gender disparities gradually diminishing, or despite the rising influence of the feminist movements, does gender oppression and inequality in its many forms persist in both global north and the south? So my experience as an activist and researcher tells me that the answer is the former, and this is puzzling. How can a strong feminist movement coexist with persistent patriarchal injustices? With this book, I hope to shed some light on this question, at least in part. And why the global south? Well, both gender and the global south share a similar struggle. Their knowledge still isn't properly recognized. They are both often overlooked and at the same time not included in the rewriting of dominant Western-centric narratives. That's why I wanted to focus on the global south and gender. The book includes 3 parts, and the first part is dedicated to a theoretical discussion. There are 3 chapters in the first part, and I engage with development studies and literature in the first part, and then I propose a hypothetical level, a new conceptual framework in the first part. Second part includes 4 chapters. They are all data analysis chapters, and they include my mixed methods like qualitative and quantitative analysis. And the last part includes theoretical, kind of a little bit philosophical discussion, the discussion chapter, and also conclusion includes some practical suggestions for Turkish feminist movement in Turkey, actually. So I mentioned the first part is suggesting the group of scholars that I like to talk through. The book engages with 2 main sets of theories: ungendered accounts of socio-economic development, I say, and feminist theories of gendered oppression and inequality. So why did I choose these 2 rather than others? Well, first of all, even when we are critical in academia, we engage with the theories we believe are most relevant to understanding and changing the world we live in. And in addition, I focused on socio-economic transformation theories or development theories or theories of capitalism, we might say, because I think they are particularly resistant to change. Despite the invaluable critique from feminist scholars, I see little shift in the core arguments that dominate this field. Within feminist theories, I focus on 2 key areas: the social reproduction approach and varieties of gender regimes scholarship. I think both of these theories, along with their limitations, are crucial for initiating social change. Classical, or Marxist political economies often assume that capitalism is the sole driver of social change, which leads them to overlook the roles of patriarchal labor relations in shaping macro-level political economy, including the proletarization process, urban wages, difference between rural and urban wages, capital accumulation strategies, and state formation. This narrow focus on capitalism also reinforces an essentialist view of cultural and religious factors. So in other words, when the typical features of capitalism can explain why development trajectories are different, diversified in the global south, attention quickly shifts to certain cultural and religious dynamics, which are also framed as the main obstacle to gender equality. While feminist scholars have provided an invaluable critical assessment of development theories and strategies, some of their accounts tend to reduce the relationship between gender and capitalism either to the gendered outcomes of or the gendered prerequisites for capitalist development. I think we need to go beyond this perspective. In my study, I perceive gender as an important factor shaping the macro-level political economy. For example, when we look at the agrarian change, existing research on agrarian change provides very valuable analysis. They provide different trajectories of agrarian change happening in the global south. However, none of these trajectories seriously take gender as an important factor. When we take gender as a significant factor changing political economy, we realize that what I call, there is a particular path of agrarian change that I call the patriarchal path. Patriarchal path exists in some countries, in my opinion, few countries in the global North Africa and South Asia, and also Turkey, the country I'm focusing on. What I mean by that is, when the dominance of small land ownership pattern is the case in the country, not for the last few decades, for almost a centuries actually, dominance of small land ownership coexists with capitalist development. And under such conditions, when women are excluded from land ownership, mostly via a discriminatory inheritance law, it creates a different agrarian structure. So patriarchal labor and property relations in this agrarian transformation plays a very significant role in shaping agrarian transformation and also shaping capitalist development in the countries. So I think that the first immediate consequence of patriarchal path of agrarian change is labor migration, its impact on labor migration. The gendered patterns of labor migration from rural to urban areas happen in very differently in comparison to other developing countries if the country is experiencing this patriarchal path. And unfortunately, not only agrarian political economy studies, but also dual sector analysis, migration studies, they don't pay enough attention to these gendered patterns in agriculture and its consequences. The last impact also is on state formation. When the patriarchal path of agrarian change happens, state formation happens under the influence of different political actors, like land-owning male peasants are significant political factors. And the multiple state agendas, in my opinion, not only the capitalist state agenda, but racist state agenda and patriarchal state agenda are interacting with each other in different ways. But I will explain a bit more when the data analysis happens. I analyzed social reproduction approach, and I joined some of the existing critique of social reproduction approach. I think these scholars largely assume that capitalist labor relations solely shape patriarchal labor relations, ignoring how patriarchal exploitation also drives socio-economic change. I also think I try to understand and kind of reveal the impact of biological essentialism on social reproduction approach. And in my opinion, social reproduction approach also assumes that the Western model in which land dispossession happens and wage dominancy is the case will happen everywhere. But in my opinion, this trajectory doesn't happen everywhere. Land grabbing, land dispossession is not the case in every developing country in the global south. And this needs to be considered when we are trying to understand socio-economic transformation. I find varieties of gender regime theories very useful in terms of differentiating different forms of patriarchy. I say patriarchy because gender regimes is very wordy, too much words to say. Varieties of gender regimes or varieties of patriarchy. Patriarchy is easy to say, I think. And just in these theories, they differentiate domestic form from the public form, and then they describe neoliberal and social democratic forms, which I find it very useful. But negative point is, massively negative point in my opinion is, they draw on complexity theory. I'm not sure if you are familiar with complexity theory very much. It's very popular in sociology. So they draw on complexity theory. I think it doesn't work very well. I defend this sort of materialism that I'm going to talk a bit more about that. And also they themselves say that we are Western centric. So in our geography, in the global south, we need to understand what forms of patriarchy occurs, and they are different in Western cultures. So part 2 is data analysis. There are 4 chapters here. The first chapter summarized is about the historical analysis that I conducted between the late decades of Ottoman Empire until 1950s, the Turkish Republican period. And in that era, I realized that during the establishment of Turkish Republic, I'm not sure if it is the case in other countries, the state had very strong nationalist agenda as well as developmentalist agenda. Turkish Republic was the first independent state establishing and defeating the colonial powers in the region. The nationalist agenda supported landowning male peasants to discriminate against non-Muslim, non-Turkish peasants, farmers. Through violent and non-violent ways, they kind of appropriated the land belonged to other people who are attacked also by the state's nationalist agenda. Developmentalist agenda also supported male farmers because they negotiated with the state. They had to give certain surplus to state that they can have the initial accumulation for industrialization. And they managed to negotiate with the state. And as a result, they kept the land for themselves. They protected the dominance of small land ownership. They expanded their land by appropriating non-Muslim, non-Sunni peoples. And at the same time, they discriminated against women in land inheritance. Turkish Civil Code in 1926 is the most modern civil code. But that civil code was more discriminatory than the previous Sharia civil code in terms of land inheritance, agricultural land inheritance. And from 1926, I think, until 2015, that civil code was in place. So almost like 100 years, legally, women are excluded from land ownership. So this situation established patriarchal path of agrarian change very strongly and gave rise to a different form of patriarchy, domestic patriarchy, that I call pre-modern form of domestic patriarchy. And I think there is a strong relationship between patriarchal path and this form of patriarchy in some of the countries that we study. And in the second chapter, I focused on this part. I focused on neoliberal patriarchy. And I found that, yes, neoliberal patriarchy is established in some regions in Turkey, but it doesn't dominate the entire population. The lines right in this map, those cities are the most, and regions are the most industrialized regions of Turkey. And you can see neoliberal patriarchy being established in these regions, but it is not alone. It coexists with domestic patriarchy in that region that I call modern domestic patriarchy. But the rest of the Turkey, as you may see, is dominated by domestic patriarchy, forms of domestic patriarchy, which means that women's labor are massively confined into domestic production, unpaid labor, or farms or in the houses. And at the same time, women cannot access education as much as, especially higher level education. And violence against gender-based violence is higher, and women kind of excluded from public sphere. So this was a bit interesting because Turkey is certainly experiencing neoliberal policies for the last 3 decades, but patriarchy is very resilient. It is not shifting very easily. In the last chapter of this part, I compared Turkey with 2 different groups of countries. The first group are the countries that have, in my opinion, very similar dynamics in terms of their agrarian structure. They share the same agrarian structure, so they are more likely to have patriarchal path of agrarian change. And it included Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Egypt, Morocco, and I forgot some of them. But the second group of countries, still from the global south, they have an agrarian structure dominated by capitalist market-led forces. So more bigger agrarian holdings and paid employment, wage employment, and the small land ownership pattern is not the case. Like Brazil, Mexico, Malaysia, South Africa, or some of the countries I don't know, Chile. Yes. And what I found with this comparison is, it is true. I use descriptive statistics here. With this forthcoming article, I provide more meaningful evidence actually. But what happened is, patriarchal past established gender patterns of labor force participation, gender patterns of labor migration, and then it has direct impact on female labor force participation. This in turn leads to shortage of labor, puts pressure on non-agricultural wages. Under these limitations, the bourgeois class, they adopt different strategies in order to defend their competitiveness in the global market. First of all, they increase working hours, which simply means decreasing hour wages. And secondly, they have a very high capital intensity in manufacturing. Some scholars in India, they think that it changes the sectoral composition rather than labor-intensive manufacturing, they do this. But what I find is, rather than sectoral composition, capital investments, technology investment in manufacturing is much higher than other developing countries, which leads to unemployment, ironically. And of course, working class movement is more sensitive against this kind of pressure, and they tend to reply back and then resist. In that case, bourgeois class needs state-led coercion more than other developing countries. Because in order to suppress working class resistance, regularly, they really need states to intervene. This is again relatively more than other developing countries. And so bourgeois class in Turkey, in other words, never played a progressive role, like some scholars suggest. On the contrary, they develop some sort of dependency on the anti-democratic state regimes. And these conditions, I'm not going into details, but support landowning male peasants. Actually, Lenin calls it patriarchal peasant. I must say, sometimes I use patriarchal peasant. I think he discovered some sort of category like that. Patriarchal peasants to keep their influence over the state as well. So part 2 is going into some discussions. I named this chapter discussion, and I wanted to feel like I can talk about lots of things and I don't have to provide concrete data analysis here. So I really wanted to see what kind of methodological and ontological framework will help us to analyze these multiple systems of exploitation and oppression, including gender, class, race, ethnicity. And I analyzed the complexity theory, and I don't think that it will help us. And then I focused on the current interpretations of historical materialism. I focused on the social reproduction approach's way of using historical materialism and French materialist feminism, Christine Delphi and that group of people. And I also, when I critically approached the way they engage with historical materialism, I argued that there is a certain level of influence on what I call mechanical materialism. And especially the Althusserian-based superstructure understanding of historical materialism is very influential in feminist way of adopting historical materialism. So in my opinion, we need a historical materialist approach to address gender, class, and race ethnicity-based oppression and exploitation. However, we must move away from mechanical materialism, and especially the Althusserian-based superstructure model. In order to do that, I think Hegelian Marxist interpretation of historical materialism will help us to understand those different systems of exploitation and regimes of oppression. So, in Hegelian Marxist interpretations, there are a couple of concepts that I find very useful. The first concept is political collective subject. I call it political collective subjects. The oppressor and exploiter, they are political collective subjects. They are organized, they have solidarity, they support each other. It's not coincidence that Andrew Tate is supported by billionaire patriarchal leaders as well. There is a certain level of solidarity amongst them. In response, Agnes Heller differentiates political collective subject. She creates two categories: the initial collective subject, which is already organized and they are oppressors, and the late coming collective subjects. They are coming. They are not there yet, but they are getting organized and they are coming. This differentiation draws on very classical Marxist differentiation of self in self-worth. I find this actor-based approach, some scholars say, very useful. Rather than technological investments, some mysterious magical ways of capital accumulation strategies, it is actor-based. People do this. Consciousness do this. People decide and get organized and they do this. I find this more hopeful. However, they also talk about mediation. In terms of capitalism, capitalist categories of mediation are discussed and analyzed very well, honestly speaking. Especially, Ellen Meckens-Wood talks about the market-mediated powers of capitalist exploitation. I find these discussions very valuable. Mediation functions in a way which sometimes obscures, sometimes changes the picture for the oppressed and exploited, that they find it difficult to understand the consequences of and the reasons for their situation. I find mediation concept very useful, and I think we need to work on it and then develop, understand the mediated categories of patriarchy and also racism. And the last concept is totality, and totality is, this is the picture that I drew after my analysis of Turkey. What I found is the capitalist totality in Turkey have its own mediation categories. The patriarchy has its own categories of mediation, which prevents women from being initial collective subject. And the racist totality in Turkey, it also has its own mediation categories. These categories of mediation actually are not the same in everywhere in the world. They change based on geography. They change based on historical dimensions as well. I am not claiming that all these mediations that I find in Turkey are the same in different parts of the world. But what I find is patriarchy has the most complex form of mediation. And when the complexity level is increasing, patriarchy is challenged less than other totalities. In Turkey, in my opinion, nationalism mediates racist exploitation or oppression, and market mediates capitalism, and cisgender heterosexual family mediates patriarchal labor exploitation. And I do have a bit more discussions about how they mutually interact. But this interaction does not mean that everything shapes everything, everything determines everything by complexity. The more complex the mediation category is, the more the totality has more influence on actually other totalities. It's a bit of a different discussion. I think I don't have time to go for that. I also end the book with some practical strategies. First of all, considering diversified experiences of women is necessary. Thanks to intersectionality, we are increasingly aware of this. But at the same time, as well as class, race, ethnicity, we need to add different forms of patriarchy into our analysis. Some women are not bothered with the neoliberal patriarchy because they experience something totally different. These divisions need to be acknowledged based on different forms of patriarchy as well. Also, we need to avoid capitalism-based reductionism in our analysis, also cultural essentialism. It is not that some country, Muslim, that women are oppressed more. It's the varieties of patriarchy and its dynamics are really complicated. And the patriarchal collective subject, capitalist collective subject, racist collective subject, how they influence the state agenda. It's very important for us to acknowledge them equally and establishing strategic alliances which can help us to reveal the mediated categories of patriarchy. So when we develop strategic alliances with LGBTQ movements, it will help us to reveal the categories, but also remembering that how nationalist and racist totality functions, it's important to work with a group of people who are targeted by the racist agenda of the state in our geographies. And I did more applications after the book. If you find the topic interesting, you might like to read a bit more. And I talked more than I thought. Thank you very much. Cheers and turn to audience.
What do you prefer? Maybe I'll stand actually because I'm not sure if people. I have to speak even louder if I'm sitting, so I'd rather just stand and speak. So if you're standing, could you stand there? Okay, sure. Thanks a lot. Okay. So, really pleased to see so many of you here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited to discuss Ece's new book. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed engaging with the arguments, and I'm very delighted to be here talking about patriarchy in the global south. What better thing could be there what better topic could be talking about right now? So let me start off by saying that this is an ambitious book and it's also an important book. It asks the big questions that have gone out of fashion for a while. I think they're coming back in. And as many of you know, since the 1990s and what Ece described too, a lot of the scholarship on gender has focused on the impacts on gender impacts and the outcomes of particular economic phenomena or the persistence of gender gaps. This has, of course, also been given more momentum by the focus on measurement because of the SDGs and the World Bank Smart Economics approach. So this has been the general kind of direction of research on gender. Of course, the focus on gender gaps has been revealing and important for the fight against inequality, but it's also tended to neglect the more systematic causes of gender subordination and how the system of gender subordination is reproduced over time. At the same time, some of the feminist scholarship in sociology and to some extent in anthropology has focused on the diversity of gendered experiences across different locations, social and geographic, across identities, across scales. And this has been a pushback against the kind of previously homogenizing narrative of how patriarchy and gender works. So it's also been important. But as political economists like Jennifer Baer have sort of cautioned us, that this overemphasis on difference again tends to obscure what is regular, what is systematic about gender oppression and its interaction with this gender difference with capitalism. And this is precisely what Ece's book aims to do. And I think it does it very well. It does refer to gender gaps, but uses them as building blocks to tell a larger story about how patriarchal power is being used to enforce a certain gender favor within the context of capitalism and with state collaboration. So this has consequences for social change. At the same time, the book doesn't neglect the diversity of experiences of different women, for instance, women who belong to religious minorities, Kurdish women, Arabian women, but it also illustrates how their experiences converge.
The book, as Ece has already mentioned, is highly engaged theoretically and has an absolutely jaw-dropping command of a variety of different literatures, from development studies to political economy, social reproduction, gender regimes, and theories of the state. So it's really impressive. And it has two major critiques of social theory. One is, of course, that it is ungendered or gender blind, and the other is that it gives primacy to capitalism in its analytical framework, and often reducing patriarchy to a subset or a derivative of capitalism. So in that sense, the book is a prime example of theory from the global south because it is using Turkish history, Turkish gender regimes, social dynamics as a means to reconstruct theory and make it more fit for purpose. So Ece has given a great sort of broad overview of the book. I'm going to pick up a strand that I find compelling and sort of elaborate more on that. So I find that the core of her argument actually builds on the work of Christine Delphi and others by recovering and recentering the concept of patriarchal labor exploitation within the family as opposed to capitalist labor exploitation. So unlike social reproduction theory that is largely focused on unpaid care within on reproductive activities and on production of non-market goods and services, the book reminds us that household production for the market or the production of exchange values, not just use values, is important in many countries in the global south, including Turkey. So the book argues that it is through women's confinement to patriarchal households in agrarian and semi-agrarian contexts that enables such market production within the household to continue. So using official data, historical analysis, the book weaves a story about how the state, in alliance with male small producers and peasants, which it defines as a patriarchal collective subject, confines certain women, not all, but some women, to the home and enables their exploitation to produce a household surplus for the market. Men appropriate the surplus and benefit from it. So in the case of Turkey, at least, women's confinement to the household is achieved, she already pointed out, through discriminatory laws on land ownership, but also their exclusion from paid employment through restrictions on mobility and access to education. These, Ece argues, are forms of pre-modern and modern domestic patriarchy while drawing on the varieties of gender regimes literature. But the interesting thing is that the story doesn't end there. And through a series of analytical and empirical moves, the book shows how the surplus from this household production pushes up urban wages, constrains labor supply, helps male peasants who own land to partly escape the process of proletarianization. And capitalists then respond to this, as you already pointed out, by increasing the length of the working day and by mechanizing, assisted by the state in repressing labor. So methodologically then, patriarchal labor exploitation becomes a device that makes a whole series of connections analytically possible when they were not earlier. So it drives the story and shapes social change, which I was really struck by. So while demonstrating these systematic effects of labor exploitation, the framework is also nuanced enough to allow for a class-differentiated analysis of patriarchy. So in a chapter that I particularly liked on neoliberal public patriarchy, the book shows through simple descriptive statistics how the state sustains women's double burden in a class-differentiated way. So while women with advanced education benefit from the commodification of care services, those who have basic and intermediate education don't. And this is a pattern, of course, that is replicated across many countries, this kind of polarization and differential access to care services. But it is these women who have basic and intermediate education who form the bulk of working age population, women's working age population in Turkey, and their labor force participation remains even lower than the average participation, which is 34% in Turkey, which is already quite low, right? So really this kind of creates this divide and polarity within the group. And the book argues then that these women are subjected to the most exploitative forms of patriarchy and confined to doing unpaid work in urban and rural areas, producing for the market, but within the household. And even those women who do join the labor force tend to leave after childbirth. Right? Now, so that's sort of the main story, I think, or at least the core of the story. And what I found really compelling about this is, of course, that it shows that different types of patriarchy can coexist and are the product of alliances between the state and political collectivities. But also, as importantly, it recovers agency through the concept of the collective patriarchal subject and clearly shows who benefits from patriarchal labor exploitation, i.e. men. It is also a very generative theoretical framework because it can be used to flexibly understand social change in other countries in the global south as well, and I'm sure it will be picked up by other scholars who are working on these topics. It also reveals a blind spot that exists in some more recent feminist analyses, as well as in social reproduction, that presume that production for the market does not happen to a great extent within the household, right? And this could be because proletarianization and wage dependency in the global north is more advanced than it is in the global south. And this could be one of the reasons why it has been sort of overlooked or neglected. But then this also, shows us why it is important to theorize from the global south. The book also points to the importance of women's labor in the agrarian transition and structural transformation, showing that it has allowed for the accumulation of a surplus that has enabled this transformation and allowed labor to move from agrarian production to industrial and service production, which is a fact that has been mostly ignored by classical development theorists. And by conclusion, a few perhaps final reflections, provocations, comments, questions that you don't have to address, Ece. Just take whatever you think is useful. So the book uses the concepts of pre-modern and modern patriarchy, which it borrows from the gender regime literature. And I wonder to what extent these are productive distinctions, because exclusion from land ownership and exclusion from paid employment are both interlinked and could well be considered modern phenomena. Perhaps you're using pre-modern and modern as a way to mark these phenomena temporally in Turkey, but I wonder if these exclusions might be better then classified as forms of domestic patriarchy rather than types. So similarly, the concept of public patriarchy and the public patriarchal state seems quite restrictive. Could it be expanded to include gendered actions and policies that go beyond the double burden? Though I can imagine it might also make the category analytically more unwieldy. I would be also interested to know more about the relationship between oppression and exploitation in your framework. So you show that religion and ethnicity-based oppression diversifies women's experiences, but does oppression facilitate exploitation? And it seems that it does in the case of gender, but your analysis perhaps seems to suggest that it does not with respect to other oppression. So I'd like to, and maybe this is just me not understanding, what you're saying, but I'd love to know more about that. I would also be curious as to your thoughts, if we have time, if you think there's a new form of post-neoliberal public patriarchy emerging in Turkey, and if that has relevance for other authoritarian populist regimes. And finally, just because I study India, I could not, I couldn't sort of help resist, couldn't resist putting this in, that India has a similar level of labor force participation for women as Turkey, but it has lower income per capita. But feminization in agriculture in India is driven by the out-migration of men. And, there's increasing poverty for women in agriculture because agriculture is a shrinking sector. And when I looked it up, Turkey has, only 6% of its GDP coming from agriculture, right? And in your framework, smallholder production still remains remunerative, right? At least until the mid 2000s, you say, and earnings are putting pressure on urban wages, right? But has that changed? Is that changing? And perhaps, is agriculture and agricultural income now subsidizing low wages in manufacturing? And maybe international competition and global trade have a role to play here. And what effect might this have on the trajectory that you have kind of provided for us? Right, I'll stop there. Thank you.
It will be, if you, whatever you want, it's fine.
Up to you. What do we want me to do?
It will be better if you're there.
Okay, I'll be brief, I guess. And again, thank you, Ece, for inviting me and Linda for organizing having a great book, as we all know. I agree with a lot of things said, and I agree with a lot of the overarching arguments. I'm not researching of what would you call a patriarchal agrarian change. So I think what I'm going to do is to argue for the thoughts, like the points that this book inspired me from the perspective of an agrarian political economist who follows historical materialist and does qualitative methods, primary data kind of analysis. And I'm really glad that because we organized this book launch 2 years ago at the OU, and I didn't get to actually ask any questions. So now I'm like engaged more closely with this book. So the first merit, I think, is the fact that not only puts core and center this idea of patriarchy, not as an analysis that is either ex ante or ex post, like, you know, this proxy that is always added as a gender, both in theory, policy, and practice, but it really, you know, integrates epistemologically and ontologically gender dynamics within the analysis of agrarian transformation, which I think is great. I also value, as an agrarian political economist by origin, the fact that this book is about agriculture. And I think as political economists in development world, in sociology, so I really welcome this interdisciplinary kind of arena. We kind of, you know, because we kind of have this Western-centric servification bias, and we forget that most of the roots and you know, origin and explanation of inequality, both local and global, are coming because of the contradictions that agricultural sectors have, you know, displayed all over the world, including in the, I mean, especially in the global south. So I really appreciate that. And I mean, without saying, it's extremely theoretically rich. It goes from the theory of the state. You cite the Lewis model, which is like something that, you know, it's, and you kind of make it a contemporary argument, which I really value. And, but also, yeah, you integrate this category of class and, you know, social stratification into the gender arguments. So this is very good. So, without going through this further, why agriculture is very good, what I wanted to, flag and bring into this conversation is the argument, like, and is the aspect that political economists such as Candioti and Bridget O'Loughlin, I think, can, you know, help to make a complementary argument of what you've been arguing in the book. One is about the emancipatory power of paid employment, which is something that we don't want to, you know, we always think about how to decolonize the arguments about the economy, but if we bring that to the extreme, we might want to ask an epistemological question of what is labor and what is work, and what is a wage and what is employment, and why it is ideal to inspire women and push women towards labor force certification, which in other ways, from a Marxist political point of view, is nothing else than a commodification of their labor. Okay. The second point that I wanted to ask you is, I agree with your, and I mean, we've been talking about this, like I completely see your choice of bringing these two body of theories, social reproduction theory and gender regimes and classification of patriarchy together, because I think I completely agree, we talked about this, they complement each other. One looks at the, like the care and kind of productive reproductive dichotomy, the other looks more of the institutional and social norm. But I don't fully agree with you about why social reproduction is a deterministic kind of theory. And for someone who uses it like as a framework, my question is for you. If we want to understand the totality of what is necessary to reproduce each other, what is the alternative framework that we need to bring in order to understand that? Because I understand that there is a system of accumulation, and accumulation as a tendency is mediated, to borrow your term, by different components, which can be race, can be religions, can be patriarchy, can be, I don't know, the environmental crisis. But it's still, and maybe too much of a structuralist, but it's a foundational category of how we operate in this world, unfortunately. So my question is, what do we use then? And then, I don't know how many minutes do I have, it's basically about the role of women, okay? And this is something that I think Agram Lodin in our previous seminars pointed out. The fact that, speaking of the conceptualization of what is a household, we want to understand household from a non-Western point of view. So marriage not as a form of love of Hollywood, but as a is an institution that regulates relations of exchange and production in different settings and in different ways depending on where you are. What if we completely dismantle this category and look at, for instance, the case of countries where households is not confined to a man, a women, and a children, but is like an entire world that brings in kinship, clans, the neighborhood, the community, sister-in-law, mother-in-law, and the case of, for instance, Uzbekistan, you can there are both qualitative and quantitative, actually not quantitative, it's really hard to grasp these nuances, but the immediate level of dispossession and exploitation is not exercised, obviously it's patriarchal, but it's not exercised by men. It's exercised through the same gender line by intergenerational women oppression. So I was wondering, how do this category of cisgender family could be meaningful in many contexts where the household, and it's also a methodological question, is not the most meaningful and significant category to analyze. And then the last point, I have other things, but I think it's fine. It's about methodology. It's a methodological question. Nobody knows, but she was a very strong quantitative ID geek. So she comes from a very abstract and philosophical kind of, symposium here, but you use it like a lot of data that are secondary data and all these statistics that kind of are really rich and are really explicatory of what is the argument of the book is saying. But how do we, just to go back to my previous point, how do we explain all this very blurred category of what is employment, what is labor in context where, you have transactions and forms of social reproduction that are completely informal, seasonal, for instance, or based on in-kind transactions. They are still like material, and they're still, therefore, attached to both patriarchal transaction, but also, accumulation. But they're not pictured, grasped, and being captured by national statistics or these like huge databases. So how do we kind of, I know that it's not the aim of the book, but it's like how, this kind of very useful study that brings in the value of capturing the trends and the comparative can be adapted to case studies that are like a little bit more complex. And so all this like taxonomy that cannot be, able to understand what happened on the ground. Denise Candioli has been written about what are the shortages of these surveys and these ontological categories. So I was wondering, what is your thoughts about this? And I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
And now we get to the people, it's totally fine. So do you want to respond to any of them, and then we'll open the floor?
Yes. Thank you so much. Both of your research is very inspiring and your experience is amazing. So I'm very lucky actually to have your feedback on this work. And I will start with Shiva's questions. So pre-modern and modern are actually, yes, they are sub-forms of domestic patriarchy. They are the main division is between domestic and public, and it's pre-modern and modern. I am myself not very happy with my terminology. I really worked so hard to find something, but I couldn't. And if you have any other ideas, because when I say modern, I mean capital modernity, which signifies the dominance of wage relationships and the detachment of producers from their means of production. So people are less hand-sized, they lost their property, they have to work. So I call this modern domestic patriarchy is under these conditions, which are in semi-urban and urban areas. But when I say pre-modern, what I actually mean, wage dependency is not the case, and dispossession is not the case. So people, more producers, still have their means of production, which is land, and it is gendered. That's why we have. This is what I try to. But maybe if you have a more better idea, I will be happy to change the names of it. And it is in terms of public patriarchy. Recently, this scholarship, Realities of Patriarchy scholarship, conceptualized different different forms of public patriarchy. Some calls it conservative patriarchy, but some call it authoritarian public patriarchy. So now they call it neoliberal, social democratic, like Nordic countries, neoliberal, US, UK, and authoritarian, they say. And authoritarian in order to reflect on this new right-wing anti-gender uprising. These concepts could be also helpful. And at that time, it wasn't when I wrote the book, they didn't do that. So now if I think I have to say something about that as well. And it is also interesting that new form of public patriarchy, which goes beyond the double burden. I think it is also possible in Europe. Social democratic patriarchy kind of goes beyond the double burden, and also there are, Karen Shire wrote on that. In Germany, apparently there are more gender equal, mostly communal houses and societies that goes beyond this kind of double burden dilemma. But I don't know about it, and I didn't come across in my case study this kind of patriarchy. Feminization of agriculture, what I understand from this concept is actually something what some countries in Africa experience. Men migrate, women stay. And agriculture really led by female headed households. But in my case study, this is not the case. Some men migrate, especially younger sons migrate, but eldest son also stays because he is the next person who's going to inherit entire land. His wife stays, his sister stays as well. They even get married to another male farmer, or they migrate someone, one of those younger brothers, not their own brothers, they migrate they marry to rural migrant men in the urban cities, and this is marriage migration. And this pattern, I'm recently trying to understand. I was talking to Devika before coming. This rural women's marriage migration is different. So in this case, in these kind of countries, I don't think we should use the concept of feminization of agriculture. It is very different, in my opinion. In Turkey, it certainly had an impact on rural-urban income gap, patriarchal part, I say. Currently, until mid-2010s, I can see still that impact. Urbanization is lower than other countries because of this income gap. But Turkey is changing so fast. Last few years, there is a massive economic crisis, the combined political crisis. I'm not sure right now what is happening, but patriarchal peasants always they have free unpaid labor. They have unpaid female labor always there, and the cost is grown almost zero. Now they also have migrants. And the migrants are paid so little, or they marry migrants. It is very heartbreaking case. And Lorena, thank you so much as well. And in this book, I try to emphasize that unpaid farm work is not good and unpaid farm work has consequences. It has consequences for their empowerment capacity, consequences of democracy in the country. Unfortunately, in my opinion, current arguments and policies on sustainability of agriculture, they never consider that they are developing some strategies which still draws on female unpaid farmers. Do these women want to do that? When you ask to those women in these patriarchal structures, when you ask them about their future aspirations, they start automatically talking about their past and how they missed opportunities of having an education, migrating, and this kind of thing. And when you ask them, what do you dream about? What do you want your daughter or son to do? Their imagination for their children is always out of agriculture because it's a massively heavy workload. So I'm not saying that women should just leave agriculture, join the labor force. But what I'm saying is, if they want to, they should have an option. And I try to design, somewhere in the book, I forgot, kind of an exit package, which is not new. Before 1960s, before 1980s in Turkey, we did have this kind of Soviet exit package, which provided education, transportation to those girls from daughters of farmers who studied in the urban area. I went to high school actually with those girls who were really interested, and they were of course guaranteed employment as teachers, nurses, doctors, or engineers. They were able to go out of that structure. But then with neoliberal policies, it stopped. But today I see China, for example, promoting kind of same policies in African continent. I find it very interesting. Some scholars from Ethiopia, they analyze actually this how this kind of policy will help women to go out to agriculture and achieve certain level of empowerment. I just think that they need to have offered an exit package if they want to. I'm very disappointed that sustainability of agriculture system entirely again relies on female employment. This is very this is not right. And I try to acknowledge that some scholars of social reproduction theory, they have kind of a different understanding. They are not very automatically reductionist. They try to do different things as well. But I don't think that accumulation is the driving force. I don't think that. And when we look at the data, you will see that there are lots of things are happening, which is harming accumulation. And how we are managing to do that in our context. And then they automatically say, oh, culture and religion. It is not culture and religion, because just because accumulation doesn't thrive. Brexit is a kind of an example that accumulation doesn't thrive. Or even now we can find some examples. What is the use of, kind of, I don't understand how they understand the evolution. Ban, for example, it's not good for accumulation. Like also in the US, there's anti-reproductive rights movements, for example. So, in my opinion, the reality is more complex than that basic structure tells us. It is complicated, case specific, and that I try to explain the possibilities, mediations, complexities, political collective subjects, and their interaction, like how patriarchal collective subject utilizes a nationalist agenda, and they still do. The anti-gender movement in Turkey is also having stated that, wait a minute, this is also for nationalism. Like it is, I find the reality is, when especially talk about it, political collective subject level, agency level, it is more interactive and more complicated, in my opinion. And you are right, there are different households, rural households in different forms and shapes, and also I'm very happy to read your work about those different households in post-Soviet countries.
I write about that, but
your work on Kazakhstan is amazing, actually. I really enjoyed that. But in my opinion, what I looked is this form of families. But I know, especially in different parts of Europe, there are totally different family forms in agriculture, like even woman-led, LGBT-friendly, and this kind of thing. And I'm not trying to go maybe so much beyond the concepts like labor, employment. I'm a bit, I'm losing that concept. Maybe I will think about it again, like you mentioned, how it necessary to go beyond, come back with a different definition, would it help us? I need to consider that because I didn't do that actually. Seasonal informal agricultural labor or non-agricultural actually included. ILO includes its statistics about the informal sector and seasonal too, because they simply ask very basic questions. For the last 5 years, have you done anything which makes you earn money? And then they categorize that. But this form of agriculture, patriarchal agriculture, is also kind of doesn't allow a huge seasonal labor circulation because they don't have seasonal labor, but they also have their general confidence labor, which is different than any. I hope I answered all the questions. I'm so thank you so much for all your suggestions. It makes me think already of think and rethink this thing. Thank you so much.
yeah, I wasn't advocating for like women to stay in agriculture. I was just saying that it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't fall into dynamics of expropriation if you move into wage employment, because it doesn't always happen, unfortunately. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll open the floor for questions. So please raise your hand, and all I ask you before you ask the question to introduce yourself. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Inka. I'm here in the International Development Department PhD student, and I would like to ask if you can elaborate more or expand how do you apply the Hegelian framework, because I was surprised that you picked up Hegel rather than Marx's criticism of Hegel, because Hegel's political theory is very much based on the that he wants to reconcile the contradiction between individual and social totality, which he seems rationalized in the form of the state. And that's why he comes up with these mediation. For example, in his language, we have the singular, particular, and the universal. We could have, for example, animal is the universal and the cat is the particular. Then we have the singular cat, for example, my mom's cat in Helsinki. And or we can have a universal state, and we can have trade unions who then represent the singular workers, and those are the ones who mediate between the individual and the totality. And but what Hegel was unable to incorporate in his framework of the spirit or the rational state is exactly what Marx picks up, is the lumpenproletariat, or those very marginalized who doesn't fit to idealize mediating identities. So Marx's criticism of Hegel is that Hegel idealizes this social mediation and is not able to account for those like who actually underpin, for example, capitalist social relations. We have the surplus population who's pulled in and out of the employment in order to reproduce the capital's command over labor, and they are not represented by this mediating category of trade unions. So why did you pick up this Hegelian framework rather than Marxian criticism of Hegel, if you are trying to account for those suppressed female voices under the patriarchy?
Great, thank you. Other questions? We can collect a couple if there. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jingyi, also a PhD student from the.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your name.
I'm Jingyi, also a PhD student from International Development at King's. And in one of your slides, you mentioned that the patriarchy system in Turkey is uneven and combined, but also I think it's also related to the, problematic distinction between modern and pre-modern. So how was they combined in your sense? I assume it's about rural to urban migration, but I think whether it can be pushed further to see how the modern or whatever can also change the rural situation. Otherwise, pre-modern can always mean like this place is always static and doesn't change. I think that's why we disagree with the usage. Do you observe this kind of change of pattern in the landowning pattern or agriculture economy? And also I want to draw another distinction used by Marx. It's real submission and the formal submission. In formal capitalist sector, its formal submission means labor as directly controlled. But in formal, it means like labor still controls their own working process. They only, but actually it's a de facto outsourcing practice. So I still wonder whether the unpaid labor in different situations is actually different. In some, it's like household economy, but in current area, it's like more about accumulation and so on.
Great. Any others at this moment? No? Okay, cool. So why don't you answer those and then we'll do another round? So you guys can take some time to think about your questions.
I mean, I am not adopting Hegel. I am not following Hegel. I am following Hegelian Marxist tradition. Hegelian Marxist tradition, it doesn't put Marx opposed to Hegel. They try to focus on the commonality. And the Lukács I follow, for example, Keller I follow, and Gramsci I follow, and as well as other scholars I follow right now. But I think the political collective subject-based analysis, which is criticized by Althusserians, they call it humanism, and I disagree with them. And if you take the consciousness, humanism, what they say, the collective subject out of the picture, it really becomes base shapes superstructures. And what is base? Well, how base works? What are the workings of base then? Technological investment base then, so industrial revolution. I really believe in struggle, complex struggle amongst groups of people. And that's the struggle, that's clash. And this struggle so far is analyzed based on class, mostly by people like me. But I think it's not enough. Race is important. Racism, in my opinion, they all talk about how capitalism needed it. Racism was there not because capitalism really needed racism, it's because some group of people marked other people, socially marked them based on their skin color, because they wanted to expropriate, they wanted to dispossess them, they wanted to exploit them. I mean, of course, it's a long discussion, but this is what I'm trying to do. And in some geographies, it's capitalism broke with racism. In some geographies, it didn't. I think we need to be a bit more acknowledging the distinguishing features and dynamics of each system's totalities, I'd say. I also forgot to answer Shiva's question. I think, like, actually, it's Eric Olin Wright who differentiates exploitation and non-exploitative oppression. And according to him, I follow his framework in a little bit. In order to exploit someone's labor, you need to make them work constantly for you. So there needs to be some sort of a consent. It's either technically a patriarchal man's wife, daughter, or proletariat. They need to come back to work next day. They need to work all the time. So you don't want them to disappear. You don't want to kill them. But in non-exploitative oppression, the aim is you want to take what they have. Like what's happening in Palestine, for example. It is more violent. It is they want them to disappear so they can own what they have. And then once it's done, it's done. So this is not a labor exploitation. It is a brutal oppression and destroying the people. And he describes this very well, actually, and I try to explain it in chapter 2, I think. And I'm not sure if I understand Junior's question very well, but it is uneven patriarchal transformation, because some goes neoliberal. In Istanbul, you might find super neoliberal families having 5 nannies at home. Maybe it's cheaper. Also, India, I think, one cooks, one cleans, one drives. But in different parts, you find forced marriages that because they need labor, and in those family structures, women are really oppressed. So it is uneven, but at the same time, it's combined. Like it's driving each other. They are mutually interacting, and they shape the entire socio-economic transformation. And I know it sounds a bit like I say there is no change in agrarian structure. Of course, there are changes, but I must, for the last 100 years, no land ownership is capitalist farming is limited to 6%. It goes 6.1, 6.2, and then 6 again. It goes like 6%. The rest are all privately owned parcels. And what is changing in agriculture is again women's struggles. Women fight back. And then when they accessed and education became mandatory, strategies changed. When legal discrimination was the case, women went on strikes. But when legal discrimination was removed, women removed legal discrimination by negotiating with religious authoritarian states. They managed it. So these things are changing. But I didn't look back to Turkish case for the last, I think, 4 years. I don't know what's happening right now. Now I'm looking at India and I'm very happy with that. I'm bordering Turkey. Very dark.
Great, thank you. Other questions? I had a question actually. I was trying to understand the schema that you had put up with like the different bubbles. I forget now what's in it. Yeah, sorry. Oh no. Oh, this time. And I think you said at some point, you said very clearly that you weren't using
complexity theory when it comes to like sociology, because that's kind of how a lot of this analysis is done within sort of mainstream sociology. I hope I interpret that correctly. I'm an economist, so I'm completely ignorant about sociology. But then you did say something about like how, of course, these elements are not the same across different contexts and they vary a lot. And you said something like as the complexity is as things become more complex when it comes to different categories of mediation, then the challenge to patriarchy becomes less likely to happen. And I did not understand what that meant at all. Because then what do we mean by complexity? Complexity along which axis? What is it to be more complex? Is that there are different kinds of relationships mediating that? But then that's not necessarily a global South thing. Or is it? I don't know. Like, why is that? So I was very confused by that. I would really love to hear more about it. And I guess this is partly maybe like a lot of questions. I don't know. Maybe you already answered the modern, pre-modern bit when I ran out for a second, but maybe it'd be worth going into it again, given that that was also part of Chingy's question. And I wonder if it's sort of if it's like a capitalist, pre-capitalist kind of, or a periodization, as Shiva mentioned, which is sort of to do with Turkey, especially because I think there's a lot of Eurocentric Marxist literature, and I'm not saying all Marxist literature is Eurocentric, but there is a lot of Marxist Eurocentric literature that would argue that like what happens in a lot of production regimes in Global South, where there's a lot of informality, household-based production, is pre-modern, and then actually there's lots of Global South Marxists who would argue, no, that's very much a feature of capitalism within the Global South. So in that way, is it helpful to then categorize this as modern, pre-modern, capitalist, pre-capitalist, but rather, a feature of Global South capitalism and how it's interacting with patriarchy? And sorry, I'm saying too much, but another one. So effectively, from what I understood, you're using sort of varieties of patriarchy framework rather than varieties. And I'm wondering, how does it overlap with sort of varieties of capitalism framework? Is it similar, not at all related? I'd be curious to hear about that. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. So my question was also.
What's your name?
Oh, sorry, Shivani. And my question was related to the same diagram. It was interesting when you say that there is a mutual interaction, but not everything determines everything. And like, because I'm also an economist, and so for the lack of a better term, like for me, it was more like, isn't there like a trickle down effect for like these three things? Like a change in one should lead to a change in another. So then when you say that not everything determines everything, what do you like, how do you like claim something like that?
Thank you.
Any other final thoughts, final questions?
Just really quickly, because I look at this and I think intersectionality.
You have to introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, my name's Aiko, and I'm a lecturer here. So I look at this and I see the classic three things in intersectionality. Why is this not discussed?
All right, I'll hand it over to you for the final word.
I'm back here. I mean, complexity theory is valuable because the way complexity theory challenges basic structure-based understanding is really important, and they involve very good challenge actually. And because our roles are a bit different, but it makes sociologists to look down on historical material. And here I was trying to take the challenges, questions of complexity theory seriously and still defend historical materialism. That's why I ended up in Marxism. And but complexity theory and little bit intersectionality as well. In the introduction, I briefly mentioned, but I didn't take them as deep. But I didn't develop huge level because, as Kimberly Shaw mentioned, it's very productive understanding approach, especially for politics. So I didn't want to go there. But they thought that all these differences, all these systems, they are equally important and they mutually shape each other, mutually interact. So capitalism shapes patriarchy, patriarchy shapes. But I still think that overdetermination in the concept, the historical materials concept, it needs to be defended as well. In some cases, there are some cases that one of these totalities are more stronger than shaping the others. That's why military intervention is important. But then I try to explain how this determination works. Of course, patriarchy is shaped by racism. Of course, capitalism is shaped by racism and patriarchy. They all shape each other. And change in one initiates change in another. But here, the mediation is a kind of a concept which prevents we struggle against particular totality. If the categories of mediation is really strong, in other words, complex, I say complex to figure out, and then that system, totality, is less likely to be challenged. So the family form, gender-based division of labor in the family, it predates capitalism and still exists after capitalism. And this gender-based division of labor is there, challenged less than other forms of exploitation. It's because family is very strong mediation. In other words, we cook because we love. In other words, we look after because we love. We work for his career and all sorts of things. And it is very complicated. It's very complex. What I'm saying is, if this mediation is really complex, that system, totality, is less challenged and stays more strong. And the rest of totalities, they are not limited, but they find their own ways.
Maybe to explain what you mean by categories of mediation that might happen.
Like, for example, because before feudalism, the categories of mediation was very primitive, not complex. Feudal lord said, I am the representative of God, you need to work more and give me your potatoes. And then it was after centuries, of course, but people challenged that. And the late coming collective subject became initial collective subject and then abolished that system. And I think there was a time period a little bit like there was something beyond capitalism was about to be established, but it didn't happen, and then capitalism was established. Like, capitalism has also complex mediation categories. Market is very important. If you don't work, you can't survive. And this doesn't mean that it is the problem. It feels like it's about me. It's not about the bourgeoisie. It's not about this economic system. And this category is also complex. But what I see in Turkey, this category is challenged more. And racism, the connection with the global south is nationalism in Turkey and in some other countries is established also based on, it draws on anti-imperialism. And this reactionary anti-imperialism feeds nationalism. And there is a bit of a panic in that as well. And this is mediation, that nationalist feelings also justifies violence against migrants, violence against ethnic minorities in Turkey, or religious minorities, since the establishment of Turkish Republic on very violent. It is an ongoing discussion. I didn't finish this yet, but I think it will be helpful to focus a little bit about that reality is more complicated and historical materialism is still helpful. And Shivam, I hope I answered this question by a little bit talking more on this. And I talk about intersectionality, varieties of capitalism and patriarchy. I don't establish connections about that, but I think the original thinkers of varieties of gender regimes, they are inspired by varieties of capitalism literature. Yes, I couldn't say pre-capitalist because it would mean that I'm taking capitalism as a central concept in my analysis. I think I try to emphasize that equally important. And this form of patriarchal path, this patriarchal dynamics in agriculture predates capitalism. So I wouldn't say that they are modern, they are feature of capitalism. And in some developing countries, like South Africa, Malaysia, capitalist farming is very strong, the majority of farming, and also some Latin American countries, wage labor is the case. So it could be maybe, it is like not dominated by capitalism. But of course, the capitalists, they have an integration with capitalist market. Whatever they do is also have to fit into the rules of capitalist market because they have to sell their products and they are affected by them. And what I found is between 2005 and 2015, Turkish state cut off state support to farmers and then started again, by the way. And during that cut-off period, the exploitation of women has increased a lot. So if it didn't stop, if they didn't reverse policies, maybe it would change the agrarian structure. I don't know. But the thing is, their farmers managed to negotiate and the policies changed again. There are lots of quotas for foreign crops and everything.
Great, thank you so much. Big round of applause for the speaker. All right, thanks everyone. I hope you'll stick around for wine, and if you have more questions for AJ, our next seminar is in 2 weeks, February 5th. No, 12th. Sorry, February 12th. I think it's in that room. But it's all the details will be online soon. It's with Ece Kocabıçak talking about his new book, Spectre of State Capitalism. So come back again. And yeah, I hope you had fun. All right, thanks everyone.